I'd ask you to join me in welcoming the incomparable Matthew Reilly.
Good evening. Thank you for coming. I like it when anybody shows up. When I did a book signing once for Temple at a bookstore in Sydney, one person turned up. And when you do a book signing, the store asks you to be there for an hour. And when the one person turned up, they made me stay there in front of the store for an hour at the desk, surrounded by my books. So I'm happy when anybody turns up. Actually, who here has read one or some of the books? Good. Who's read the new one? Okay, good. Just checking. I won't give away the ending. I used to have a bit of a tradition of reading some really horrible, venomous reviews at my talks. But I decided, since it's the first week of the book, that would be far too negative. And so I thought I'd actually, I never do this, I'd actually read you just a little bit, just a couple of lines from the very start of Scarecrow and the Army of Thieves. I'll tell you a little bit about it later on. But let me just read you a little bit from the very start. The President is in the Situation Room in the White House. He's just learned that the Army of Thieves, this mysterious group, have taken a top-secret Russian base up in the Arctic. The President said, "Are you telling me that in 5 hours an unknown force is going to set off some kind of superweapon that will ignite the atmosphere of the Northern Hemisphere?" "That's correct, sir," the Deputy Director of the DIA said. "We have 5 hours to save the world." A couple of pages later, he's just spoken to the President of Russia. The President slammed down the phone. "An air approach is out of the question," he said, "and the Russians don't have any units close enough to get to Dragon by sea within 5 hours. What about us? What assets do we have in the area? Anyone who's close enough to get there, undetected, by sea or over the ice, within 5 hours, to stop that weapon from going off." "I'm sorry, sir. The Air Force has no such assets in the region," the Air Force commander said. "Neither does the Army, sir," Army said. "The Navy say that they might have some SEALs in the area." While all this was happening, the Marine Corps representative had moved off to a corner of the room where he spoke into a secure phone. He hung up and turned to the President. "Sir, there's also, well, what? I've got a small equipment testing team up there, camped on the sea ice, about 100 miles north of the island. Been there for the last 7 weeks. A few Marines, a DARPA guy and some civilian contractors testing new gear in extreme weather conditions. It's not exactly an assault unit, but it's somebody and they're up there." "Who's in command?" the President asked. "A captain named Schofield, sir. Call sign, Scarecrow." The next line is actually Scarecrow, the one I spoke to the French President about a few months back, the United States citizen the French military put a floating bounty on. But I'll let you read that to find out. Yeah. Oh, thank you. That's all right. I'll go into a little bit more detail in a second. I'm going to show you a bunch of screens while I talk tonight. I'll talk about the new book, I'll talk about Scarecrow, I'll talk about how and why and what I write. You'll see throughout the evening, I've got this cool laser pointer tonight. Woohoo! If you see any of these black and white pictures, these are from the Japanese graphic novel of Ice Station. For those of you who've read Ice Station, you'll know that those are the French paratroopers. You can tell by the guns they're carrying, the FAMAS assault rifles. I tend to think of the poor Japanese artist who had to keep drawing the soles of those boots on every single page. And this image on the left-hand side, "Don't Feed the Whales at Wilkes Ice Station," is also it's something I found on a fan website. And it's amazing the things that the fans come up with. Obviously, that was a rather nasty scene in Ice Station. Click. Oh. That's better. As you're probably aware, I've written 10 books, 10 novels and one short novel, the novella Hell Island. The books, there are 2 series, the Scarecrow series, Ice Station Area 7 and Scarecrow, and the Jack West series, 7 Wonders, 6 Stones, 5 Warriors, and a couple of standalones, Hovercar Racer, Temple and Contest. The books are sold around the world in over 20 languages. I've sold over 4 million books, and I've sold some movie rights as well. But I'll tell you a little bit about Hollywood later on. But today, the main subject of what I'd like to talk about is Scarecrow and the Army of Thieves, which is the first Scarecrow book since Scarecrow in 2003. I tend not to count Hell Island. Hell Island was in 2005 and was a little side adventure. But it was released in Australia as part of Books Alive, and they gave out 250,000 free copies, which quickly found their way onto eBay. Australians selling their free books to Americans for $50. And Hell Island does get a mention in the new book. So if you've read Hell Island, you'll get a kick out of the little mention it gets in Scarecrow and the Army of Thieves. But I've told you a little bit about the story. This top secret base up in the Arctic is seized by this mysterious group called the Army of Thieves. One of the things I do with the Scarecrow books, and I don't do it with any of the other, not in the Jack West series and not in the standalones, the Scarecrow series is the only series which actually has a formula. And there's only one thing to the Scarecrow formula, and it's in the first line of the Scarecrow books. And it began with Ice Station. And the formula is that when you meet Scarecrow, he is always heading into danger. And so with Ice Station, it began with the first line was that the hovercrafts raced across the ice plain. They're heading towards Wilkes Ice Station. Area 7, the presidential helicopters thundering over the desert plain, heading towards the secret base of Area 7. Scarecrow, the stealth bombers carrying the Marines inside it are heading to Siberia, going into danger. Even Hell Island, the little one, I followed that first line idea of Scarecrow in the cargo combat Talon plane heading towards Hell Island. And it's the same with Scarecrow and the Army of Thieves, that when you meet Scarecrow, he is heading into danger in these 2 assault boats, which happen to be the most technically advanced assault boats you've ever seen in your life. And so while I would always resent and defend anybody who accused me of running to a formula, there is only one formula in the Scarecrow books, and it is in the first line. The reason I do this is that there's a storytelling structure that I'm a big fan of, and some of you will have heard of it, the hero's journey. And some of the most famous films of all time, Star Wars, Harry Potter, The Lord of the Rings, famously followed the notion of the hero's journey. And I like the description of the hero's journey as like a caveman story. Think of a tribe of cavemen living in a valley, and they fall sick. And they are told that there's a cure to this illness in the next valley. So they pick their bravest young warrior, and he has to leave the safety of their valley and go into the dangerous valley next door. And in the dangerous valley, he's going to encounter monsters. He might make some friends. He's got to overcome obstacles. He's got to get to the deepest, darkest place in that valley, grab the cure for the illness, and then he's got to get back. And usually getting back in most movies is the car chase. Our caveman gets back to his tribe, gives them the cure, and restores the natural order of things. Now, the key to the hero's journey is the transfer of the hero from the ordinary valley, the ordinary world, into the dangerous one, into the extraordinary world. Now, my books are known for their pace, and I'm often asked, how do I make the books fast? The way I make the Scarecrow books fast is that with Scarecrow going into danger on the first line, that's him going from the ordinary world straight into that dangerous valley next door from the first line. So this story structure, which I think people respond to in a very sort of primal way, I'm actually utilising that from the first line. So if you've wondered how I make the books fast, that's one of the ways I do it. One of the other ways is the diagrams, but I'll talk about them later. With Scarecrow and the Army of Thieves, I actually do put out a little warning. I write my books for adults. It's been fantastic to see teenagers jumping onto the books, and teenagers have always, throughout the ages, wanted to be treated like adults. But Scarecrow and the Army of Thieves, more than any of the others, is quite an impactful book, and I would say if you had maybe a sensitive 13-year-old, it might not be the book for them. It's got the toughest villain in any of the books I've done. For those of you who read Scarecrow, and I'll mention it a little bit later, I put my hero Scarecrow through the ringer in that book, and I thought, well, who could be the worst possible villain for him to face in the next book? And I thought an expert in psychological warfare would be the one. So the Lord of Anarchy is pretty tough. And with every book, I try to do something new, something better, something different from the ones before it. And with this book, I not only wanted a fast book, I wanted an intense book. And Scarecrow and the Army of Thieves, my idea was to create a book that was relentless in its relentlessness, When you put it down, I hope you are shaking. I hope you put the book down on the table and look at it and go, oh my God, how did I get through that? That's the kind of book I'm trying to do with Scarecrow and the Army of Thieves. I'll give you some embarrassing omissions tonight, notably my very first author photo. Dreamy. I think they airbrushed it. And this thing on the left-hand side, this is just some of the fun things you get to do as an author. This was a magazine piece where they juxtaposed somebody who's had some success with a job they did in the past. When I was a university student, I actually drove the elevator at the main Myer store in Sydney. So I was the guy who said, you know, 4th floor, washing machines, that sort of thing. And so then they stuck me in an elevator with a model. So the things you do, someone's got to do it. Might as well be me. I'll get rid of that author photo. What is a Matthew Reilly book? When I started out, all I wanted to do was to write action stories that were bigger than the biggest Hollywood blockbusters. Hollywood blockbusters have a budget. I don't. I can blow up aircraft carriers and it doesn't cost me a cent. And I've gone now far, far beyond that. What I particularly like about the images on this screen, and these are obviously the Japanese graphic novel in the middle. These are two marketing pieces from the UK. And it might be a little hard to see it, but on this one, there go my notes. On this one, I love the fact that the Scarecrow book is connected with a game console, because I don't see my books actually competing with other books. I think readers can read a Matthew Reilly book and they can go and get somebody else's book, and that's perfectly fine. I see my books competing with movies, video games, the internet, and I love the fact that in this marketing campaign, you can just see that the game console is smoking, as though the book wore it out. And I love the idea that my books could actually be so hyperkinetic that they actually outdid the video game, and that is something that I'm really happy to aim for. I mentioned Contest briefly. It's quite well known now that I self-published Contest to get my start in publishing, but I bring this image along because this large one is the original self-published cover of Contest. This is the book that I took to bookstores and said, hi, my name's Matthew Reilly, this is my book, would you like to put it on the shelves? You'll notice it says his electrifying thriller across the bottom, which I stole from the cover of Jurassic Park, my favourite book. That's the New York State Library, which is actually the New South Wales State Library in the middle of Sydney, computer doctored so that New South Wales reads New York. Interesting thing is this is the US hardback edition of Contest, and when the book came out, was going to come out in America, my American publisher said, New York readers will know that your building, the New York State Library, is a fictitious building. Can you rewrite the book and set it in the actual New York Public Library? And so on a book tour, I was in New York and I went to the public library, and fortunately my library was researched on those sorts of libraries, and so it roughly matched. And so I came back to Australia with a red pen and just went through the Australian edition of Contest, and meaning that the US edition of Contest is the same story with Stephen Swain thrown into the building to fight the 6 most lethal aliens in the universe. He fights the same aliens in the same way, in the same order, just in a slightly different building. So the US edition of Contest is unique in that regard. Just a bit of trivia for you. And these are a couple of pictures of 2 of the aliens in Contest. One of the things I thought I'd do tonight is tell you a little bit about some of my favourite bits in the books. And in terms of Contest, the favourite bit that I have is actually a favourite character, and that's actually the character of Reese. Reese is the monster that just won't quit. Just when Swain thinks he's beaten everybody, Reese keeps turning up. And so Reese is one of my favourite creations from Contest. Frequently asked question number 1. Most authors probably get this. Where do you get your ideas from? Where do I get them from? I read a lot. I read a lot of non-fiction. Maybe for every 12 books I read, I get one really good idea. In one non-fiction book, I was reading about Egypt. And in particular, I was looking to recreate an Indiana Jones type story. But to have an Indiana Jones type story, you need something that Indiana Jones would go in search of, a great ancient relic. In my reading of Egypt, I found out that the Great Pyramid at Giza is 9 feet shorter than it should be. And if you have a look at this picture, you'll see at the top, the Great Pyramid is actually flat at the top. That according to this book, in ancient times, at the top of the Great Pyramid at Giza was a 9-foot-tall, solid gold miniature pyramid, or capstone. When I discovered that, I said that is something Indiana Jones would go in search of. This is the most famous building in the world. Until the Eiffel Tower was built, this was the tallest building in the world. For nearly 5,000 years, it was the tallest building in the world. What happened to the golden capstone that sat atop this building? Disappeared in antiquity. Great thing for my hero to go in search of. And obviously that became the subject matter of Seven Ancient Wonders and the Jack West Jr. series of Seven Wonders, Six Stones and Five Warriors. That's the US cover of Seven Ancient Wonders. Not sure if you can see the difference. I remember my American publisher said, Matt, we want to change the title to Seven Deadly Wonders. Seven Ancient Wonders, Seven Deadly Sins. I said, yeah, I get it, and I don't like it. And I said, no. And then they had the president of the company give me a call and say, we really like this title. So I said, okay. And so they went with it. But interestingly, I'll tell you about some of the recent TV deal I just did for Seven Ancient Wonders. The TV writer behind it decided he'd actually, because you've got the Seven Deadly Wonders issue and the Seven Ancient Wonders issue, he just decided he'd call it Seven Wonders. Sorry, dropped my notes. Okay. The second question that I often get in terms of research, where do the ideas come from? The second question I get is often from aspiring writers. Do you have to go to a place to write about it? The answer is no. I wrote Ice Station and Temple just by researching them in my local library. I still haven't been to Antarctica or to Peru. But it does help. It does help to go to places, and a couple of the places I've been to, the National Air and Space Museum in Washington, D.C. That's the X-15, which featured in the book Scarecrow, the fastest plane ever flown. Easter Island, obviously there's the Pyramid and the Sphinx. The Colosseum, which became the starting line for one of the races in Hovercar Racer set in the future. Easter Island, which featured in The Five Greatest Warriors, was definitely a place where there's a lot of information available in books and on the internet. But you can only learn certain things by going there. If you go to Easter Island, you'll find out there are 1,200 of these statues. The classic Easter Island statue, which is carved from a soft volcanic rock called tufa. But when you go there, you'll discover from the guides there that there were just four statues made of basalt, which is a much harder stone, much more difficult to carve. And when the British came to Easter Island and decided to take 2 of the 1,200 statues, they took 2 of the basalt ones. And that Easter Island statue, with me in front of it, that's in the British Museum in London. Now, when I read something like that, that is something for a Jack West story. What did those British people know? How did they know to pick 2 out of 1,200 statues? How did they know that these ones might be significant? The other thing that you find out by going to Easter Island is you see some of the earliest statues on the island. And I don't know about you, but I reckon they look like aliens, especially that one. The other thing that I found out by going to a place was actually in Egypt. And it's this symbol here, which featured on the very first page of Seven Ancient Wonders. I wanted, when I was writing the book, I wanted to know if there was a hieroglyph for death to grave robbers. Surely these pharaohs who hid their treasures wanted to put a warning on their tombs that said, if you enter my tomb, you're going to die a horrible death. And didn't find it in any of the books, nowhere on the internet. I went to Egypt, and I went to the Valley of the Kings, and the guides are actually not allowed to take you into the tombs. So I said to my guide, is there a symbol for death to grave robbers? And he said, yes. And he said, go inside and look for a symbol which has 2 thieves bound with their hands behind their backs to a staff of Anubis, the god of the underworld. He said, that is the fate that will befall a thief. If you rob a grave, you'll be bound to Anubis for eternity. And I went into the tomb. It was of Ramesses III, and I found that symbol. And so while all the tourists are walking past me, I'm crouching down with basically a pencil and a piece of paper, and I'm drawing that. And so that became the first page of Seven Wonders. So do you have to go to a place to write about it? No. Will you find excellent extra information? Yes. I just like these pictures. These are a couple of the short stories that I've done. I don't do so many anymore, but in the early 2000s I did some short stories for The Bulletin, their summer fiction magazine, and what they do so well is they get some artists to reproduce some of the images. And these are just a couple of my favourites. I often experiment with things in the short stories. Time tours. If you want to know how you get a guy firing a bazooka at Big Ben with a scantily dressed babe and a sort of robot guy driving the car with a Nazi army coming down from Trafalgar Square towards them, you should go and read Time Tours. It's actually a really fun story. Complex 13, the notion behind that was that the Soviet Union might have had their own Area 51. I include this page as just various adventures in research. That's a YouTube clip of the Dimona nuclear research facility that appeared at the start of The Five Greatest Warriors. A ex-Dimona scientist defected to Russia, told the Russians about it, and the Russians put that on the nightly news. And I found it on YouTube. Top secret facility on YouTube. For those of you who've read Six Stones and Five Warriors, this is the map of Stonehenge with the Preseli Hills. And the Preseli Hills is the quarry where they got the stones to build Stonehenge. If you do draw a line from the Preseli Hills through Stonehenge and keep drawing the line, it will pass through the Great Pyramid of Giza. It works on a globe. Go and give it a try. And I just put this mention of the Lisbon earthquake because, again, we've seen more tsunamis in the last few years than we have in the last few decades. And for Five Warriors, I wanted to have these hidden vertices in the story. I wanted to have one hidden by the ocean itself. And I discovered in my research on tsunamis that before a tsunami hits a coastline, the water on the coast recedes back out into the sea, so the beach recedes. But in 1755 in Lisbon, in Portugal, they had a tsunami, but before the tsunami came in, the water in the harbour receded several kilometres out to sea, exposing the harbour floor. And what you found on the floor were crates that had fallen off boats and powder kegs and barrels. And so the people of Lisbon thought, we'll run out and go and grab this stuff. So they ran out onto the floor of the harbour, and then unfortunately 20 minutes later, in came the tsunami. And now I saw this and I thought, well, this would work for Five Warriors. If one of the entries to one of these subterranean vertices was a water entry, a tsunami would recede back, expose the entry, in goes Jack West, and in comes the tsunami later. So these are the things I'm looking for these stories. I'm looking for scale, and in Five Warriors, with Tsunami I was looking for scale. One of the things in Five Warriors which has really creeped people out are the formaldehyde tanks, which we found in the lair of Mordecai Muniz in the Dimona Nuclear Research Facility in Israel. I've met people at book signings and they said, you must be a really creepy guy. The formaldehyde tanks really creeped people out. But I think I'm a pretty well-adjusted guy. I thought I'd bring this because this was the inspiration for the formaldehyde tanks, and it was the old Harry Houdini water trick. I always found those reinforced glass tanks with the water in them and the magician inside really quite a dynamic and an alarming image. And so that's the actual image I had in my head for the formaldehyde tanks. Some more embarrassing admissions. I actually take photos of the television set and use them as screensavers on my computer. You'll notice there's a bit of Raiders, Return of the Jedi, From Dusk Till Dawn, the climactic scene of Jaws, which I think is one of the great climactic scenes. I'll have to move a little forward quickly. I don't mention Temple very often, and I'm happy to talk to people about Temple if it's one of their favourites. It's one of the little standalones that I've done. It's the only book of mine which has the two stories in one in the past, one in the present. You'll notice that the American edition here, they decided to call me Matt Reilly. They thought it sounded younger. But I don't have time tonight to really go into Temple, but I would like to mention Hovercar Racer. While my books are written for adults, Hovercar Racer is the one which I wrote for younger readers. I wrote it because I had a 9-year-old boy come to a signing for Scarecrow. And I thought Scarecrow was a little bit too impactful for a 9-year-old. About 16 people get their heads chopped off in Scarecrow. So I thought I should write something which was as fast as the other Matthew Reilly books, but not as impactful, without the swearing or the violence. And that's where Hovercar Racer came from. What you see in Hovercar Racer are actually a lot of references to the Voyage of the Argo, the Apollonius of Rhodes story written in ancient Greek times. The clashing bergs are like the clashing rocks. Obviously Jason and the Golden Fleece, Jason's car, the Argonaut, based on the Argonauts. I'm often asked, would I do a sequel to Hovercar Racer? The answer is probably not, because I do write my books for adults. The other thing is I had to come up with about 12 or 13 different kinds of races, and I've only come up with about 6 more. So if I can come up with another 6 or 7, I might think of doing a new hovercar. The other thing about hovercar is I took a lot of inspiration from real life. And 2 things that I took from real life. One, there's a scene in Hovercar Racer where Jason and the bug run out of gas just before the finish, and they have to push their car over the line. The inspiration for that came from the 1973 Bathurst 1000, where Peter Brock's co-driver, Doug Chivers, had to push his car into the pits because he ran out of petrol just in pit lane. His crew were not allowed to help him until he got the car to their spot on pit lane. So those pictures of the crew, they were not allowed to touch the car. He had to push it by himself. And he literally, if you jump onto YouTube and have a look for that, you'll see he is literally out of breath as he pushes that car. It's the most incredible thing you've ever seen. There's another thing in Hovercar Racer, which I really like, and it might be my lasting contribution to the world, and hopefully it's the one thing people take from Hovercar Racer, and it's the Bradbury Principle. Again, for those of you who read Hovercar Racer, you'll know that there's a point in the book, well, actually throughout the book, young Jason Chaser, the hero, his father, who is loosely based on my own father, he's always saying to him, now you remember the Bradbury Principle, Jason? And yeah, Dad, you remember the Bradbury Principle? And you know, we go through the book not knowing what the Bradbury Principle is. And the Bradbury Principle is, you always keep going. Even if you are coming stone motherless last in the race, maybe on the last turn, everybody else will fall over. And you can skate by. And obviously it's based on Stephen Bradbury in the 2002 Salt Lake City Winter Olympic Games. And I think if Hovercar Racer does nothing else, I hope it actually inspires the younger readers who read it to stay in the race. And of course, Jason, at the deepest, darkest point in the story, is coming last. And what happens on the last turn? Somebody else crashes into somebody else and he waltzes by. To get back to Scarecrow. Obviously, Scarecrow and the Army of Thieves follows the Scarecrow series, Ice Station Area 7, Scarecrow on Hell Island. Actually, I won't do that yet. I'll show you some images from Ice Station, hovercraft chase, Hollywood concept drawing. The scene in Ice Station where the killer whales leap out of the water and grab the French troops and wriggle back in, that was based on a David Attenborough documentary called Wolves of the Sea, which showed these killer whales off the coast of Argentina swooping in up, surfing in up the beach, sliding up, grabbing the seals and wriggling back in. I had them grab French paratroopers. And I'm still not published in France. Of course, Scarecrow then, blew up a French submarine, sank a French aircraft carrier. I mentioned Hell Island briefly, as I said before. It's short. It was done for the federal government Books Alive program. We gave out 250,000 copies, and Australians took some of them straight to eBay. Hell Island, though, it has a special place in my heart because it's short. And because it's short, it gets younger non-readers into reading. It's not as intimidating as a 500-page book. And oddly enough, Hell Island has turned out to be one of the most satisfying books that I've done. When the government asked me to write it, I thought, I'm going to do a Scarecrow story. I'm going to make it as a rampaging action blockbuster. It's a pretty violent book, but nobody in the government ever asked me about that after the book came out, after they gave away 250,000 copies. Now, to mention Scarecrow and the Army of Thieves, I should mention Scarecrow. Now, I did do a very bad thing in Scarecrow. I killed off a much-loved character in a very, very nasty way. I got hate mail for that. I could tell when Scarecrow would come out in a new country because I'd get a little wave of hate mail. I had to do what I did in Scarecrow because these are thrillers. And in a thriller, you have to be concerned about the hero and his friends. And not only does death have to be present, death has to be quite horrible. And what I did in Scarecrow has reverberated throughout the Jack West series and into the new book too. And I still get emails from people who write to me and say, I was holding my breath reading one of the newer books because of what you did in Scarecrow. What I did do in Scarecrow did lead to one of my favourite scenes in all the books I've done, which is the fight between Schofield and Mother on the rain-swept cliff in France. I did want to know who would win a fight between Scarecrow and Mother, and I decided that Scarecrow would win it. And if you want to know what Mother's leg looks like, that is a fellow from a photo I took earlier this year. So that's Mother's titanium computer-controlled leg. If you want to know how a professional artist thinks, this is my original sketch drawing of Dragon Island, the main location in Scarecrow and the Army of Thieves. And the cover of the book over there, what the professional artist Wayne Haag, who's done my covers since Seven Ancient Wonders, he took this image, which is from the south looking down, and he swooped around to the north, took himself down to water level, and looked back up at the island. And it's one of the great reasons to work with smart people. I would never in a million years have thought of that. And this is the full picture of the cover and the full painting that he did. And if you want to know how big it is, that's me next to it for scale. And what they do is they put that in a gigantic scanner, and then so it gets a really clear scanned image. And if you look closely at the back cover of the book, you'll see there's a little polar bear just there. But in that picture, the detail that he has is extraordinary. Key elements in the story, these vents, tower, cable car line, I don't know if we'll see that get used, little islets down here, and off to the right-hand side, there's a plane. Now, I haven't done this before. The next slide is a spoiler in the book. It tells you what happened to the plane, okay? So what I'm going to do, I'm going to count 5. I'm going to click to the next slide. I'm not going to say anything. If you want to know what happens to the plane, you can keep your eyes open. If you don't want to spoil it, shut your eyes. No one's going to say anything. And so I'll keep counting to 10. And when I get to 10, I'll click through and I'll tell you it's safe, okay? We clear? Yep. Don't want anybody going, oh, no, you spoiled the book for me. Okay? Okay, on 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 6, 7, 8, 9. Okay, it's safe to open your eyes if you shut your eyes. Some people know what happens in a plane. Who shut their eyes? No. Oh, I'm genuinely curious. Good for you. There's no judgment here. If you want to, some people don't want it spoiled. I thought I'd mention briefly some of the things that happen in Hollywood with the books. Hovercar Racer did buy the rights to. Disney did buy the rights to Hovercar Racer. It's still ongoing. They very much like the idea of doing it in 3D. And I think the idea of a car hovering, moving out from the screen is very appealing to them. Scarecrow was optioned by a big company called Level 1 Entertainment, and they got me to write the screenplay, which I was very pleased to do because it's the 3rd book in the series, but they want it to be the first film. And so I was able to use the introduction to the Scarecrow character in Ice Station and put that into the Scarecrow screenplay. Literary Superstars was the TV show that I wrote a few years ago, and for those of you interested in screenwriting or even writing for television, it's a great example of why you should get a big shot agent. I wrote Literary Superstars, sent it to my agent, who works down the hall from the agent for Darren Star, who made Sex and the City. And so she gave my script to his agent, he gave it to Darren, Darren liked it, he wanted to work with Jenna Elfman, he sent it to Jenna Elfman, she liked it. They called me on a Thursday and they said, Jenna wants to meet the writer. Can you come to Hollywood and meet her next Tuesday? And so I jumped on a plane and I met Jenna Elfman the next Tuesday. And it was only then that she discovered that I lived in Australia and had flown over especially to meet her. We got to casting the show when my fellow writers went on strike and killed my show. You got more chance of being struck by lightning than having a writer's strike. Happens once every 25 years. And recently, in a very exciting development, this was only about 4 weeks ago, Mark Gordon, the man who produced Speed, Saving Private Ryan, and for television, Grey's Anatomy and Criminal Minds, he's optioned the Seven Wonders series to make as a multi-part TV show, a la Game of Thrones. And for me, for someone to do justice to Seven Wonders, it was once slipped to a studio in Hollywood and they said there's not enough money in the world to make this into a movie. To do it as a TV show, and especially with the success recently of Game of Thrones, to me, Mark Gordon, he's as big as Bruckheimer, and so if anybody can do it, it's him. So that's where things are with Hollywood. Final embarrassing admission. These are the toys that I'm famous for, the DeLorean and the Han Solo. It sits in my office. It was a birthday present from my wife. That's my little story ideas drawer. That's where I cut out articles from the newspaper, boarding passes, anything that I have put an idea down on. As for the future, Thieves has finally been released. I feel like I've been sitting on dynamite for the last year, so very pleased to finally unleash it on the world. I have written a new book, and it's set in the 1500s, and it's a fast-paced sort of murder mystery thriller, and very, very exciting book. I'm working on a new project, and I figure since you guys come along tonight, you should get to see something that nobody else gets to see. The new project is a screenplay project, not a book, and it involves things in it like this. Ooh. And this. So I'm looking to do a really big planets fighting planets film. I figured nobody's doing any sort of Star Wars type film, so I should kick it off. So Thieves is out. I've done the new book, a new big space movie, and the last thing I got done is I got a new author photo done, which looks a little bit more like me. And that's probably a very good place for me to stop and say thank you to the Wheeler Centre for inviting me along. Thank you all for coming. And if you have any questions, please feel free to ask right now. Thank you for coming. Oh, got some hands up the back there.
Is there a chance of seeing Aloysius Knight and in a future novel?
The Black Knight from Scarecrow. The Black Knight was very nearly the hero of Seven Ancient Wonders, but ultimately I decided he didn't have enough ancient history knowledge to be the hero of that book, and so I created Jack West, and I'm really quite glad that I did. I don't think I'll do a novel with the Black Knight. He may return in a new... Well, if Scarecrow survives this book, Knight might join him in a future book, and I do have an idea where he may play a part. I was also thinking of perhaps a new short novel a la Hell Island, which might work for Aloysius Knight. And that's something I thought I might put, on the internet or through Facebook for free. I do like to give something back to my fans for free, just for being fans. So that's possibly where Aloysius Knight will go. Maybe a new Scarecrow, maybe a little short one just for him.
You were saying that Lord of the Rings followed the hero's journey plot.
Yes.
Would you say that Aragorn or Frodo was a better hero in the...
Actually, well, there's a very complex answer to that question. I think they both follow their own hero's journey in the story. We as the reader, I think, follow Frodo's hero's journey, and it's really quite clear. He starts in the very safe, pleasant little hamlet of Hobbiton and leaves the pleasant hamlet to venture out, not only into the extraordinary world, but ending up in the fires of Mount Doom, the deepest, darkest corner of this extraordinary world. And Aragorn, in Frodo's journey, he's one of the friends that he makes along the way. The very interesting thing I find about Tolkien and the hero's journey, and it's the same in The Hobbit, is Tolkien is really tough on his hero. The hero in Tolkien book, Frodo, returns to Hobbiton and finds that he actually doesn't fit anymore. The journey has actually changed him. And you can actually, it's very well done in the film, where he's sitting in the pub looking at all the other people dancing around and having fun, and he can't have fun anymore. And so he has to leave. He's been irrevocably changed by the journey. And if you look at The Hobbit, I think The Hobbit is a cracker of an adventure story. Bilbo goes on the journey, and when he comes back to Hobbiton, they're trying to sell his property out from under him. These relatives have had him declared dead. So Tolkien's pretty tough on his heroes. Aragorn, I think you could actually do the hero's journey on Aragorn, but it's a different kind of sort of sub-journey. If you really want a mind-bender, try and analyse the original Matrix movie as the hero's journey, because the ordinary world and the extraordinary world actually flip over about 20 minutes into the movie.
What inspired you to first start writing?
The books I was reading were starting to follow a formula. And there was an action scene and a rest, and an action scene and a rest. And I said, why don't you get rid of the rest breaks? Why don't you just have a book which goes from action scene to action scene to action scene? And that's how I developed Contest. Contest was designed like a roller coaster. a short little incline, and then all the way to the end. And once those fights started, once Swain was on the run, it was never going to stop. And that's why Contest is a little shorter than the other books, but it was the prototype. And that's where I think iStation, I advanced, I evolved on the prototype, but it was trying to build a better mousetrap. I thought the books I was reading weren't fast enough or big enough. I figured, why not blow up aircraft carriers? And you can see I've gone bigger and bigger and bigger. That's what started me. Yes, we've got some hands down the front too. Yes?
You've said you've read many books in your time. I would like to know who your favourite author is and why.
My favourite fiction author is still Michael Crichton, and it was Jurassic Park, which was the book that really made me want to write books. I thought Jurassic Park was just a fantastic achievement in originality and fast-paced storytelling. In the early parts of Jurassic Park, the book, you've got Alan Grant, and he gets sent these plans, and he's looking at the plans, and he goes, it looks sort of like a zoo, but the moats, these concrete moats, they're like 60 feet deep, and the fences are like 200 feet tall. It's just, someone's got all the scale wrong. And it builds to reveal Jurassic Park. It also had about 10 times as many dinosaurs as the film did, and they were chasing and eating people. And the death of the character Nedry, who is played by Wayne Knight in the movie of Jurassic Park, the computer programmer who tries to steal the embryos, his death scene in Jurassic Park is just one of the most horrific things I'd ever read. And I thought, cool. And then I read all the other Michael Crichton books, The Great Train Robbery, Congo. Rising Sun is one of the fastest books you'll ever read. Recently I've been reading Michael Lewis, non-fiction books. He wrote Moneyball, The Blind Side, and he wrote the best book on the financial crisis called The Big Short. The Blind Side was obviously turned into a very successful film and is a remarkable book. Moneyball has just been released as a film in America starring Brad Pitt, and it'll change the way you watch professional sports. So Michael Crichton, Michael Lewis. Yes? Someone's got the mic.
Are you planning to continue the Jack West series?
Sorry, where are you? Oh, there you are. Am I planning to continue the Jack West series? Yes. Writing 6 Sacred Stones and 5 Greatest Warriors was really hard. It was writing basically one massive 800-page story, or 900-page story as two. And I should say at this point, I won't be doing any cliffhangers again. I apologise for the cliffhanger at the end of 6 Sacred Stones. It really seemed like a good idea at the time. You know, I thought I've done lots of cliffhangers at chapter endings. I thought, why not have a big cliffhanger at the end of the book? And it seemed like a good idea, except that the people who had to wait the longest for 5 Warriors were the big fans. And I felt it was actually unfair that the biggest fans actually had to wait the longest, and the people who came late to the party, they get to read 6 Sacred Stones now, and they can just grab 5 Greatest Warriors straight away and just read it in one hit. And so I won't be doing cliffhanger. Will I go on? I am trying to plan out the 4, the 3, the 2 and the 1 with one good overarching story and 4 self-contained stories as well. So if I can map that out, which having tried to map out 2 at one point was tough, mapping out 4 is going to be a challenge. And since it takes me about 13 months to write each book, it'll be 4 years of writing. So I'm sort of trying to suck it up to actually get down and do that. If I can come up with that big overarching story and I'm close to it, yes, I will. I wouldn't mind, if it's okay, to do the odd Scarecrow one in between, because and it's a nice release because the Scarecrow books are far more intense thriller than the Jack West books. The Jack West ones are more adventure. And again, as I say, Army of Thieves is an impactful book. I think you could give the Seven Wonders series to a sensitive 13-year-old, whereas I wouldn't be giving Army of Thieves to such a teenager.
I was just wondering when the audio version of the new book's coming out, because I'm missing out.
I'm very sorry about that. Normally it comes out at the same time. And I know that Belinda Audio, and with the same reader, Sean Mangan, they were producing the audio book, and they picked up Scarecrow and the Army of Thieves quite some time ago. So I'm a little surprised that it's not out yet. But if you like, I'll go and chase them up. And I'll say, get cracking. I'm very sorry about that. I assumed it would be out in the same week. I shall chase it up.
I noticed that book 2 wasn't in this book, and I've been asked by my brother to ask you why he wasn't in this one when he was in the first 2 or the last 2 Scarecrow books.
Yeah. It's funny. With the Jack West series, Jack acquired a little sort of military family along the way, and as I wrote the Jack West books, the family sort of got larger to about 5 or 6 people. Scarecrow, I found Scarecrow to be a little bit different, and so sometimes the characters who survive these adventures with him, and let's be honest, there aren't many of them. Usually it's just Mother. Some of them I decide just to let them go. I actually assume that Scarecrow is not quite the same family or not the same quite military family that Jack West is. And so I assume maybe book 2 gets reassigned elsewhere. He was obviously very talented. And in a storytelling sense, I wanted him in Area 7 as a slightly suspect character because of what happened to Book in Ice Station. And so maybe by the end of Scarecrow, I think I felt I had done enough with book 2, and that the one person who lingers with Scarecrow is the ever-loyal Mother. And so I think that actually elevates Mother more. It's not that I didn't like book 2, but with this book, I love the notion that Scarecrow has become a bit of a problem. That after the events in Scarecrow, not only is he psychologically damaged, and people may not want to work with him, but the French have decided to put a bounty on him and have made 2 attempts on his life. And so the Marine Corps, with nothing else to call on, just go, well, damn it, we've got to test this stuff up in the cold weather, so we'll send Scarecrow up there with a bunch of civilians. And the notion of what I wanted to explore was putting Scarecrow up against these totally impossible odds and not having him with the usual gang of battle-hardened Marines. I wanted to put him with civilians. And that created a great sort of insurmountable odds for him. Yes?
What were you like as a child and a teenager? Like, were you an avid reader, or who were you? Like, how'd you spend your time?
That's a good question. I think I was very typical of teenage Australian boys. I read till I was about 12, and then I stopped. And I went off and played sport and did everything that young Australian guys do in the sun of the summer. Played cricket, went swimming, went to the beach, that sort of thing. What I find is that we often have to catch boys back again into reading, that they get turned off by the books they were given in high school. In year 7 and 8, I was given Gulliver's Travels and Silas Marner to read. And if you want to turn off a 13-year-old boy from reading for life, give him Silas Marner. Now, these books are classics, and they're good when you're a little older, but I'm pleased that there are some schools that give Contest or Ice Station to the 13, 14-year-old boys. It was in year 10 where the 2 books that my school had set on the reading list were To Kill a Mockingbird and Lord of the Flies. And they were the 2 books which actually taught me that reading could sweep you away, could really transport you. And once I discovered that, I went off and read Alistair MacLean, Michael Crichton, Tom Clancy, Jeffrey Archer, some of the early Grishams. I thought The Firm was a fantastic read, and then decided that, from the earlier question, that they weren't fast enough, and so set about writing my own stuff. So I wasn't writing stuff in my mid-teens. I don't think I wrote anything of note till I was in about end of year 11, start of year 12. If you asked me at age 15 what I wanted to do, I would have said I wanted to be an action movie director, and I would build little sets for my Star Wars characters. If you want to know what I got up to, in a rainy Sunday afternoon, that's what I did. But I discovered that if you want to make action movies, you've got to get someone to give you $150 million. It's easier to write a book, and then you can be the director and the producer all in one.
Thankfully, my school did The Hobbit in Year 7.
Excellent.
Yeah, not wrong. My question is, why the French? And because I haven't read that anywhere that you've noted, why particularly the French?
Yep.
And whether another nation had been an option other than just the French.
I recently did an interview with Fairfax, with The Age, publishers of The Age, and it's still on their website. And midway through the interview, the interviewer asked me about the French, and I commented that I'm not published in France. I'm published in every country around France, but not France. And I turned to the camera and I just looked at it and I said, "Man up, France, and deal with it. You're the baddies, so what?" And then I did that in the interview, and I went to the website, and there's my picture on the video, and the title is "Man Up, France." And the subtitle is, "Matthew Reilly has so offended the French that they won't publish his books." And why the French? It actually came about from the research for iStation. iStation, about the discovery of what appears to be a spaceship buried in the ice beneath this ice station in remote Antarctica. The story is actually about, as far as I'm concerned, the changing the balance of world power. Right now, America is the dominant military power on planet Earth. And the notion was, if this was a spaceship, whoever found it would get a 20-year leap head forward. And in my research, I'd actually found that the things mentioned in iStation about France declaring with quite disgust that NATO was an American organisation with American objectives, and they quit NATO, and now they are still only an associate member of NATO, it made me think, well, maybe France would want to get that edge on America. And so that's why the French troops make their play in iStation. And obviously the other villains in iStation are the British. And again, part of that was that the British SAS are well known as finest special forces in the world. And my hero was a lowly Marine. And the notion of a Marine going up against the SAS would actually be a slam dunk. The SAS should win. So automatically my hero is up against it. And you'll always find in a Scarecrow book, Scarecrow's not the most talented guy in the room, but he's a damn determined little bastard. And he'll just keep on trying. That was iStation. With Scarecrow, I felt that the French would have still been upset about what happened in iStation. So I felt that was a good reason to bring them back again and helping with the bounty hunt. I have no excuse for Fabien in Hovercar Racer. That is just flagrant French bashing. He is simply a moustache-twirling French bad guy. So there's no excuse with Hovercar Racer. I can cop that. And of course then, when it came to Thieves, again I felt there's a good story here, and there's a good story of having the French decide that this is enough. And as I read at the start, the President talks about this discussion he's had with the French President, and the French President says, I will acquiesce on trade, on Iraq, Iran, Afghanistan, but we will not remove the bounty on that Marine. He destroyed a submarine, he killed our troops, and he sank an aircraft carrier. We want him dead. And so that brings the French into this story, and in a very nice, fun new way. Notably, the character of Renard, and the character I really like, a character named Bubba, who is perhaps the male version of Mother, and a real scene stealer. Yes?
There are a couple of movies out there that show the early development of characters, such as Batman and Casino Royale. Have you thought about doing that with Scarecrow, about when he got the scars?
An origin sort of story. I have thought about it, and it's explained in quite detail in iStation, and funnily enough, it shows that Bosnia is now quite a long time ago. And actually, I've stopped putting years as dates in the Scarecrow books because I don't want him to age the same way we're aging. I actually want to slow down his aging so that he can still be, or so he's not a grey-haired old man in a few years. I'm not so sure I'd do an origin story for Scarecrow. Again, I still think these are thrillers because you should be worried that this could be the one where Matthew Reilly finally goes all the way and actually kills the hero. And so if it's an origin story, you'll know he survives. And I can't leap that hurdle. I still find in an origin story, you'll know he survives. So I don't want to do that. I've stopped his heart a couple of times. So yes, last two, I'm told.
I was wondering about the next 4 books of the Ancient Seven Wonders series.
Yes.
Do you have any ideas for the titles? Because there's the 7 Ancient Wonders and the 6 Stones and the 5 Warriors. What would the 4, 3, 2, 1 be? Is there anything, especially the 1, is there anything that's so big that even though just one thing is enough to compare to the 7 Ancient Wonders?
Yes, I do have ideas. I have actually in my house. I have a fireproof safe in my house. I'm when it comes to the security of the books, I'm really quite anal, especially when you get to the end of a book and you've got it saved onto a USB. I save it onto multiple flash drives, and I always carry one with me, just in case the house burns down and my computer is destroyed because it's so much work. With the 7 Wonders series, I've obviously been thinking about the last 4 books for some time, and I have one sheet of paper which has the 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And it has plots for them. And I was so proud of myself for coming up with the damn thing. I made a copy of it and I put the original in the fireproof safe so that if the house burns down, that fireproof safe will be still standing and it's there. If you did manage to get hold of my iPhone, you would also see about a dozen different titles for the 4. The 4 something somethings, 4 something somethings. I actually don't set the title in stone until I'm into the book, but I do have multiple titles, and I do have one for the 1 something. And the last question, I think. If you have a question, you can always ask me at the signing table.
You talked about that you'd like Hollywood to make your movies.
Yes.
I've got 2 questions. One is, what movie director would you like to direct your movies, and what actors do you want to play Scarecrow and Jack West?
In terms of directors, I'm partial. One of my favourite directors is John McTiernan. John McTiernan directed Die Hard, The Hunt for Red October, Predator. Even made Die Hard 3, Die Hard with a Vengeance, which I think is visually just a tremendous film. It's not the best Die Hard film, but visually it's a stunning film to look at. I love McTiernan. Roland Emmerich is a director that I like. If Steven Spielberg came knocking, I wouldn't say no. In terms of actors for, say, Scarecrow or Jack West, the funny thing I find is that actors grow old quite quickly, and Hollywood is always on the lookout for the next new young actor coming through. For Scarecrow, the actor that I like at the moment is Josh Duhamel, who's in the Transformers films as a soldier. I think he's in the TV show Las Vegas, which I've not watched, but in terms of my visual image of Scarecrow, he matches it at the moment. But again, if they don't get their skates on, he'll be 45 pretty soon, and then you'll have to look for someone younger. For Mother, it's an interesting thing. I always love Mother. People say they'll hunt me down if I kill her off, but that doesn't scare me. Interesting. I see, say, Queen Latifah as a good mother. But the interesting thing about Mother is that her skin colour is never mentioned in any of the books. After I wrote Ice Station, people came to me and they said, "Oh, Mother, she must be African American." And I went and looked back at the book, and there's nowhere in Ice Station that I described her skin colour. And so I thought, if people thought she's African American, they can think that. If they think she's white, she's white. And so I never have, in any of the following books, Area 7, Scarecrow, Hell Island, or Thieves, I've never actually mentioned Mother's skin colour. If a movie's made, that might create an image in people's minds. As far as Jack West is concerned, go Australian, Hugh Jackman. I don't mind Russell Crowe. But again, I don't know how old Russell Crowe is these days, and I don't know if he's closer to 50 than 40 now, and I think Jack has to be younger. But again, it's a minefield of a question. It's fraught because everybody has their own idea, and ultimately, with some of these movie projects, I have no say in the matter anyway. So they'll be looking for the next young thing coming through, and I can only do my best to sort of say, I quite like that guy. But really it's not my say. And that's probably a good place to stop. And I think, am I signing up the back up there? I better go sign some books. Thank you very much for coming. And